Have you ever wondered why a group of black college students sitting quietly in a library once caused an entire city to shut down its libraries? It happened in Greenville, South Carolina on July 16, 1960. Among those students was a young man who would later become one of the most recognizable voices of the civil rights movement. His name was Jesse Jackson, but at that moment, he wasn't famous. He was simply a college freshman who wanted access to a book, and that simple request would ignite one of the earliest civil rights protests in Greenville. The problem started with a book. The story begins months earlier. Jackson had come home to Greenville during a break from college. At the time, he was attending the University of Illinois. He needed a specific book to write a paper, so he went to the Black Branch Library. The problem? It didn't have the book. The librarian told him it could take 6 days to get it from the main library. 6 days was too late for his assignment, so Jackson walked to the Greenville County Public Library, the city's main branch. But that building had a rule everyone understood. It was for white patrons only. Jackson was told he could not use the library. That moment stayed with him. As one student later recalled, Jackson left with a quiet promise. He said he would come back. The Greenville 8 months later, in the summer of 1960, Jackson returned to Greenville. But this time, he didn't come alone. He gathered 7 other black students to challenge the segregation policy. The group would later become known as the Greenville Eight. They included Doris Wright, Hattie Smith Wright, Elaine Means, Willie Joe Wright, Benjamin Downs, Marguerite C. Wright Crosby, Joan Madison Daniel, and Jesse Jackson. These were not famous activists. They were teenagers and college freshmen, but they were determined. They had been counseled by NAACP leaders and by Reverend James S. Hall, Jr., a Greenville minister who supported civil rights protests. Their instructions were simple: walk in, sit down, pick up a book, and refuse to leave. The first attempt. On the morning of July 16, 1960, the students entered the Greenville County Library. They quietly sat in the reading room. Some opened books. Others flipped through newspapers and magazines. They didn't shout. They didn't argue. They simply read. White patrons stared. Library staff panicked. Police were called. Officers warned the students they must leave or face arrest. The students left that morning to regroup. They returned to Reverend Hall's church. Hall gave them a final instruction. Go back, sit down again, and this time, stay. The arrest. That afternoon they returned. 8 young black students walked back into the whites-only library. They sat down, picked up books, and began reading. A handful of white patrons quickly left the room. The librarian, Charles E. Stowe, asked the students to leave. They remained silent. Within minutes, police officers arrived. The students were arrested and charged with disorderly conduct. The entire protest had lasted only a few minutes, but it made history. Photographs later showed the students standing on the steps of Greenville Municipal Court, calm and composed after their arrest. They were released quickly on $30 bond. Black attorney Donald J. Sampson arrived to defend them. They had been jailed for barely 15 minutes, but the message had already been sent. The city's response. The sit-in immediately ignited debate across Greenville. Civil rights leaders moved quickly. On July 28, 1960, Attorney Sampson filed a lawsuit in federal court seeking to force the Greenville library system to desegregate. City officials reacted with an extreme response. Rather than integrate the library, they shut the entire system down. On September 2, 1960, both the white and black branches were closed. Mayor J. Kenneth Cass issued a statement blaming the protesters. He claimed that attempts by a few Negroes to use the white library had forced the closure. The irony was impossible to miss. To avoid integration, the city took away library access from everyone. White residents began complaining. Many called city officials demanding the libraries reopen. Public pressure began to grow. A quiet victory. 2 weeks later, the city made a decision. On September 19, 1960, Greenville reopened the libraries. Officials never publicly announced that segregation had ended. But their statement said the libraries would now serve any citizen having a legitimate need. The language was carefully chosen, but the meaning was clear. The Greenville library system had been desegregated. The charges against the Greenville Eight were eventually dropped. And a quiet student protest had changed the policy of an entire city. The moment that shaped Jesse Jackson. For Jesse Jackson, the experience was transformative. It was one of his earliest acts of civil rights activism. The young man arrested for reading would soon become deeply involved in the movement sweeping the South. He worked closely with Martin Luther King Jr., helping organize marches and campaigns for voting rights and economic justice. After King's assassination in 1968, Jackson continued the struggle. He founded Operation Push and later the Rainbow Coalition, advocating for political empowerment and economic opportunity. Decades later, he would run for President of the United States in 1984 and 1988, building one of the most influential political coalitions in modern American history. But long before the speeches, before the campaigns, before the national stage, there was simply a student sitting in a library chair, reading a book. Why this story matters. The Greenville Eight were not famous. They were young people who believed access to knowledge should not be determined by race. Their protest showed something powerful about the civil rights movement. Sometimes history doesn't begin with a march. Sometimes it begins quietly, with a book, a chair, and the courage to sit down where you're told you don't belong. The students of the Greenville Eight changed their city, and one of them would go on to change the nation. Subscribe and comment if you'd like to hear more about the Greenville Eight and Jesse Jackson. And go to my videos to see more. We don't glorify injustice. We reveal truth, so history can't repeat itself.